Preemptive clapping, that's good. All right, sweet. So yeah, as Adam said, I'm Chris Johnson, and Adam asked me to come and give a talk about exhibiting games, so I'm here to do that. Usually I prefer to do shorter talks, but there's a lot to cover in this one, so I'll be talking for a while. At the end, I'm going to open things up for questions and hopefully a bit of a discussion as well, because despite having been involved in exhibiting some games before, my experiences are limited, and I'm sure everyone out there has a whole bunch of other experiences and advice that they can add to everything that's presented here. So if you have any thoughts or any questions, feel free to raise them at the end, where we can have a rigorous discussion. To provide some context for the advice I'm about to give, I should give you a bit of a run through about myself. So I'm a game designer, and programmer from Adelaide, like most of you here. A lot of the stuff that I work on is non-commercial. I have a strong interest in creating small experimental games. I've made a whole bunch of game jam games with friends, a whole bunch of puzzle games using the fantastic Engine puzzle script. I've made some politically oriented games as well. We've got an extension I made for Matt Troviani's game Hacknet last year, where you broke into the security system of a slaughterhouse. And this game here, which I'll talk a little bit more a bit later, which was made back in 2004, where you played as a superhero who went back in time to save the environment, because by 2020 it was going to be all messed up, which unfortunately might be the case if we keep doing what we're doing. But I'm most known for these two games here. So on the left you have Mirai, which is a short experimental narrative game that was made available in I think 2013. Was launched on Steam in 2016, became really popular, and is unfortunately now no longer available to play. I developed that with Brad Barrett, who did the graphics, and he's currently the coordinator of the Indie Games Room over at Avcon, and John Osman, who did the music, and my partner Catherine, who did some of the writing. And then on the right, we have Expand, which I worked on with Chris Larkin, who's a fantastic local composer. He's done music for a whole bunch of games, including Hollow Knight. And in Expand, you're sort of moving through this black and white circular labyrinth, and you're playing as a small pink square, and the labyrinth twists and stretches and expands around you as you move through it. Expand's available on PC, and as of last year, the PlayStation 4 as well. I've also had a bit of experience in exhibiting games. So here's a picture of back in 2004, when I was in high school. A group of us made that Pollution Solution video game, and we exhibited the game at several shopping centres and at farmers markets and a whole bunch of different places. We even had someone dress up as the main character of the game, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of good things going on with this booth. I could talk about it for ages. But we also we went to a few different places. So here's us at the Montepara Shopping Centre during the school holidays. We set up a table with 2 computers for people to play the game, and we also did a colouring in competition where kids could colour in the picture that we had set up, and we ended up filling all this bush here, this big board in the background, and I think another bush as well. Yeah, it's pretty cool. More recently, though, I've been involved with exhibiting Expand at several different events. So we've exhibited at Avcon for about 3 years. We showed the game as part of the PAX Australia Indie Showcase in 2014. And there's a picture with me and Chris. We went to the Tokyo Game Show as part of the Sense of Wonder Night, which is a presentation for experimental games. The game was shown, we showed it at Hybrid World Adelaide, and we also showed it at a few international events as well. NED Games Festival in Korea, and another a film festival over in France. Beyond that, I've also helped with exhibiting other people's games. So in 2015, I helped Matt with showing Hacknet at PAX Australia. Oh, I've kind of skipped over things. So yeah, so I've had a bit of experience in exhibiting stuff before. Beyond that, I was also involved in, I suppose, in second of command role in the Indie Games Room at Avcon for about 5 years. So I've seen a bit of this stuff before. The way I'm going to kind of start this talk off is by talking about some high-level goals that you might have when you're exhibiting your game at an event. So for example, some common goals that you might have is you might want to get some playtesting in, you might want to do some marketing, meet with press, do networking, be that with other developers, with fans of your game, or platform holders or service providers. You might be trying to get a certain number of sales, so you might be selling your game at an event. And you might have a whole bunch of other reasons that you'd want to be exhibiting as well. So you might find it very useful to use the event as a deadline and really push towards getting a new build of your game ready by that deadline. On top of that, just exhibiting your game and going out there and putting it in front of people is a really valuable experience that can really help with personal growth as well. But I'm going to focus on the first few goals here. And what I want to do is I want to talk about how you can sort of take these high-level goals and convert them into actionable, measurable things that you can actually do at events. So for example, with playtesting, a good thing to do is to devise a series of design questions that you want answered at the event, right? For marketing, you might want to get a certain number of people on your mailing list. For press, you might want to reach out to a certain number of journalists. For networking, you might aspire to reach out to all the developers at the event and introduce yourself personally, or maybe find someone who's in a particular field or area that you're going to find useful. And for sales, you might just want to reach a certain number of units that you sell at the event. And so I think going through the process and before you go to an event and figuring out what these goals are is really important to help you not just to push you towards doing things that you're trying to achieve, but also in terms of helping you figure out what your expectations are about the event. Right? Usually what you find is after the event, you have a lot of useful information, but you won't always be sure about your previous impression of what you were expecting. So it's useful to set these goals kind of ahead of time. With that said, different events are suitable for different kinds of goals that you might have. So to talk about two events that people here would be most familiar with, you have the Indie Games Room at AvCon. So AvCon draws in roughly 20,000 attendees. It's a smaller show, but the people that you're getting through the door at AvCon, they usually have a much more diverse range of interest. You'll have people there who are interested in not just games, but anime, Japanese culture. You'll have parents and you'll have kids. So it's a really great event to show your game in front of a more diverse audience. Unfortunately, unfortunately there are fewer press people. There's some really great ones here in Adelaide, but compared to a lot of the events that are on the East Coast, you've got to get fewer press people at the event. So it's a little bit harder to get that press attention. With that said, though, it's relatively inexpensive to exhibit your game there. It's quite low risk, so this gives you a great opportunity to go to an event like AvCon and build up those essential skills that you're going to need when you go to much bigger events. The other event I'll quickly talk about is PAX Australia. And sort of continuing on with what I was saying, at PAX Australia every year, you usually see one or two developers who've never shown their game at a convention before. And because they've never shown their game at a convention before, they tend to make a whole bunch of very basic mistakes because they don't have that experience. So if you can, I would encourage you all to submit your game to AvCon next year and get that experience of exhibiting there to really hone and build up those skills. But PAX itself usually has much more attendees. I'm not sure on the exact number, but we'll just say above 50,000. It's in Melbourne, so that's on. So you're going to get much more of the Melbourne-based press and the other press that's flying out for that event. So it's a better event for building those press contacts and really connecting with the Australian press scene, which are a really friendly bunch. There's a larger audience there, so it's potentially higher exposure for your game as well. And your ability to network is also greatly improved at a place like PAX. Usually all the platform holders will send out a representative. So Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, they'll send out representatives to these events. So if you're interested in getting onto consoles, there are people at these events that you can talk to and help you out with that. Which is particularly useful because they can also skip you past a whole bunch of the annoying paperwork that comes when you register outside of a contact. One of the questions as well that's worth asking is, with these high-level goals that you have, is it actually worth you even attending an event, right? Because we're all based here in Australia, a lot of the big gaming events are overseas, and so it's really expensive to, to book flights, to travel out, to stay somewhere for a while. It's also really bad in terms of carbon emissions, but yeah, beyond that, it's, you really want to think, is it worth all this time and all this energy and money to travel out to these events? It might be possible for you to achieve some of the goals that you want without going out to these events. To give you an example of this, the Korean and French events that Expand was shown at, we didn't travel out for. But one of the things that we really wanted, and we could have gotten from these events, is people who would help translate our game into French and Korean. So one of the things that we did was we reached out to the event organizers and we asked them, do you know anyone who would be interested in helping us translate, the game? And we found people. And we ended up working with the French translator to bring the game out, translated into French. Unfortunately, we didn't work with the Korean people because it's a little bit harder to release your indie game in Korea. But yeah, but some of these high-level goals you might be able to achieve without actually having to go to the event. So let's talk about these all in a bit more detail. So playtesting. As I mentioned before, it's really useful before going to the event to come up with a series of questions that you want answers, or different ideas about your game that you want verified. For example, maybe the third level in your game is a little bit hard and you're not sure if it's too hard and should be moved later, right? Alternatively, you could try to verify if the tutorial that you have in your game is being very effective at onboarding people into the game experience, right? Which is particularly good for events because the first time people play, they'll be running through the tutorial. So it's a great opportunity to build up a really fantastic tutorial. Alternatively, you might want to know, is the music in your game annoying, right? Are people finding it frustrating and are they tuning out? And there are several different approaches that you can use in terms of answering these questions. I'm going to start off by talking about some technical ones, and then I'll move into some analog approaches. So one approach you can do is what's called a localized A/B test. And an example of doing that might be that you have two computers at your booth. You could run one build on one computer and another build on the other computer. And those builds might have subtle differences, and then based on the feedback you're getting from the different builds, you can verify an answer to your question, right? Alternatively, if you only have one machine, something that you could do is you could say randomly serve different levels for every gameplay session that occurs, and then judge the feedback that you're getting from players with that. Alternatively, you can reveal a whole bunch of the common variables that you use within your game inside the game, maybe inside of a hidden menu, and in between sessions you can go in and tweak them if people are finding things too hard, too easy. If something doesn't feel right, by exposing those variables, you can jump in, tweak the build, and then see how players respond. Of course, I should also mention a common strategy a lot of people do is that if they're exhibiting over several days, after each day, they'll take some of the feedback they've received and they'll put it into updating the build and presenting a new build on the next day, right? It allows you to iterate quite quickly. Just be careful though if you use these kind of approaches to make sure that you have a backup of a working build in case one of your changes breaks something. You can also capture gameplay analytics during different sessions of your game. There's a lot of frameworks and tools that make this very easy to do. One example might be every time someone finishes a level in your game, you record an analytics event that says maybe how long they took to play through and the number of times they died. Just be careful because you want to make sure that any tooling you use here is going to support some kind of offline storage as well. Another really useful technique for getting kind of gameplay feedback is to actually record replays of people playing. And there are different toolkits and frameworks that actually make this very easy. For example, I'm building a game at the moment using a fantastic framework called Haxflixel. And in Haxflixel, there's a VCR recorder. And what that'll do is I can just hit record and it'll capture all the user's input data and put that out into a string. I can then save that string to a file and load it back into the game later. So beyond going back and watching people's replays, I can also use it to help me track down bugs that might have popped up during the event. Now I'll quickly talk about some analog solutions as well, and these ones you should all definitely be trying. So firstly, you can just observe people, watch them play. And the reason you want to do that is because a lot of the time you'll find the feedback you get from conventions is very positive. It's very difficult to confront a stranger with very critical and potentially negative feedback. So a lot of people end up giving very nice and positive feedback. And you might be able to actually spot this in action if you see someone who's having a particularly frustrating time. They might then come out and say that they found the game to be quite easy and not frustrating. So it's worth just observing people. Of course, when you do, you don't want to be overbearing. You don't want to intrude in their personal space. You don't want to interrupt them. Just let people play, but just keep an eye on what they're doing. And you can then use those observations that you make when after the players finish playing as part of a conversation that you have with them. Maybe a player is getting stuck at a particular level, right? When they get up and they're about to leave the booth, you can sort of just ask them, what were you thinking when you were playing this particular level? What was running through your mind? What did you find hard? What didn't you understand, right? So talking to players is, of course, the other obvious way to get feedback. If someone's, getting up and they're frustrated and they're stuck, you definitely want to be asking them, for their feedback. But just like analytics or any sort of means of collecting data, you still need to put in the effort to analyze what people are saying, right? None of this is coming to you for free. There's a whole bunch of work you have to do to interpret the problems that people are describing. Sometimes you get a lot of player feedback where they're describing the symptom, they're not describing the problem itself, but they're describing something that's related to the problem as well. Of course, when talking to players, you really want to be a good and effective listener. So try to avoid interrupting, be friendly. Don't tell them that they're playing the game incorrectly. Can't really play games incorrectly. That's a really silly thing to say. Don't belittle them. Just be enthusiastic, open, and curious for their feedback. And in some ways, actually talking to players is useful, not just for getting playtesting feedback, but in a way to help build up your marketing. So when you're talking to people, they'll use a whole bunch of different descriptions of your game. If you find that a lot of people are using the same kind of words to describe your game, then those words might be useful in forming, some of your marketing material, because they're going to most effectively convey to people what your game is. You can also ask for a feedback form. You can also put feedback forms out and get people to write stuff down. I really don't like these. I'm not a big fan. It feels in like a lot of these situations that you're asking people to put in a whole bunch of work for you. People are going to these events as as people who enjoy games and just want to check out some games. They're not your employees. Don't demand free labor from them. That's not fun. I have seen, with that said though, on top of that, people often have terrible and bad handwriting. So you might get the best feedback, but if you can't read it, it's practically useless. I have seen one approach where this has worked really well, and that was at AvCon last year, where I was playing a game called Subtractive Synthesis, which is Kathy's game. And after playing, I got up out of my seat, I turned around, and Kathy raced up to me with a clipboard. And the clipboard had a whole bunch of questions. And she enthusiastically asked me, what did I think, and asked me each of these questions, and then wrote them down, which on my end was a much more positive experience. I wasn't, I was only having to talk to Kathy, so it felt like a natural conversation. I didn't have to do all this extra work into writing stuff down. I'm sure Kathy's handwriting is much better than mine. And it felt like they really cared about my feedback, as opposed to, me having to do it myself. On top of that, if you are going to have someone sitting at your booth filling in a feedback form, then that time is eating away at the time that you could have someone else playing your game. All right, let's go marketing. Sorry. Okay, so marketing is much more than just your pamphlets and your business cards. It's the your entire presence and your entire presentation at the event. There's a lot of useful information out there about how to create good business cards and pamphlets. So not going to talk too much about those. I'll just quickly say one of the useful things with business cards is, if you want to distribute copies of your game, it's very easy to print out, redeemable keys of your game onto some sticky paper, cut them out and stick them to your business cards. And then if you have press or, people you want to be beta testers for your game, it makes it very easy for you to distribute, copies. If you're running low on cards, then just put some aside. You don't always have to have them out in front of your booth. Just put them aside in your pocket and give them out to maybe the press or the really super fans that come past your booth. If you run out of cards, then something you can do, and we did this a little bit, you could just tell people to take a photo of the booth. Hopefully, you've got a nice URL or game name that's really easily searchable. Or you could just take a selfie with them as well. That's also cool. You definitely want to avoid stickers. At a lot of events, they actually put bans on stickers. That's because a lot of venue owners hate peeling stickers off the walls, and that always happens, and they usually charge the people organizing the event, for every sticker they have to peel off. So I wouldn't waste your time with stickers. Maybe instead look at badges. At PAX Australia, badges are really, really popular. It's a bit strange, but they are. So, yeah. Anyway, let's talk a bit more about presentation. So the presentation of your booth is going to greatly impact people's first impression of your game. And so what you want to do is you really want to structure your booth in a way that's going to filter in the people who are going to be most interested in your game, right? That means clearly presenting not just what your game is, but what your game isn't. This is important because these events act as a great opportunity for you to find people who are going to be your big fans of your game, right? The people that will champion the game for you. And in some ways, as a lot of the people, as I imagine a lot of people here are, we're small independent developers and we don't have these big marketing budgets or resources. So we really need to have people in the community who care about our games and are willing to champion them for us. And they're the kind of people you want to be reaching out to at these events. I've got no pictures, unfortunately, but I've got two examples of booths that I think have done a few simple things that really work effectively at filtering in and filtering out people. So one of them is a common booth setup done by a friend of mine called Izzy Gramp, who's working on a fantastic game called Intergalactic Space Princess. And her game's really bright and really colorful. It's a point-and-click adventure game. And every time that she shows at an event, she usually has a very bright, usually glittery or shiny tablecloth. And if you step back and you look at the booth from a distance, you can really spot her booth out. And that's really good because there'll be people who come past and maybe they're not interested, maybe they're only interested in dark, gritty first-person shooters. And as soon as they see her booth, they might choose to go and play another game. Or if they're really open-minded, they'll give it a shot, which would be a great thing to do. But again, you want to be filtering in people who are really going to care about your game. Another example of this that I saw done really well is Matt Trobiani's game, or Team Fractal Alligator's game, Hacknet, which in PAX 2015, what they did was they had several machines set up, just laptops, and then above those laptops they had big screens. So when you went up to this booth, all you saw was this wall of screens, and the screens at the top would play gameplay footage of the game with scrolling terminal text, and it really made the whole space feel like this sort of, that it was part of a hacker movie that actually inspired some of the events from the game. So there's a real focus there about bringing the universe of the game out of the game and into the booth. If you're, the other thing I should mention is that if you have a game and it's just sitting at the title screen, that it can be very difficult for people to get a sense of what the game is about. One way you can get around this is you can set up other screens that have gameplay footage that's constantly on loop. That's kind of useful to have. Alternatively, you could just have your game jump to some simulated gameplay. Of course, that implementing something like that is going to take development time, so you need to schedule for it as well. Or alternatively, you can just alt-tab between a video of your game, and then when someone jumps on, you just flick back to the game. If you do that, of course, make sure you pause the video because you don't want to have the audio from the video and the game playing at the same time. Something that I think is really worth thinking about is how easily your game could be understood from a distance. You could do a whole talk about this, but luckily someone's already done that. The amazing Zach Gage, who is like just phenomenal, New York game designer, did a talk for GDC, I think this year, about building games that can be understood at a glance. I would highly recommend that you get your phones out, take a picture of that URL, or chase it down afterwards, because it's got a lot of really good insights about that. But yeah, if your game just sits at the title screen, there's no real way for people to understand what's going on. The other thing that you should be thinking about is, how well does your booth look from a variety of different angles? So, if I'm, halfway down, the other side of the exhibition center, how easy is it to see your booth? How well does it stand out? How legible and readable is the text from a distance? Then if the booth is crowded, can people still get a sense for what the game's about? What you'll see at a lot of conventions is that people will have monitors that are a little bit taller than the average person in the crowd, so that if anyone's walking past, they can still see a bit of the game. And on top of that, if you have players waiting to play your game, it gives them something to look at while they're waiting, because sometimes it's a little bit difficult to stare over the shoulder of the person that's playing the game at your booth. You can also add signage around your game to explain how to play and what it's about. I'd really encourage you to avoid having too many sort of tutorial kind of information on your signage. Partly because at conventions, actually just in general, a lot of people won't read it, and if you're telling them up front a whole bunch of instructions, you're at a noisy convention, they might not hear you. So use these opportunities to really create an effective tutorial and try to minimize the amount that you have to explain up front or talk about up front, right? You literally want to get people who are coming to your booth onto the game as soon as they can. The other thing to remember is when you release your game, that signage isn't going to be around to help people out, right? So you want to make the game as effective as possible at tutorializing itself. Of course, you can always add props, bring a tablecloth. All of these things are really great for just decorating your booth and bringing that universe that your game has out into the real world. So I would really recommend at least getting a custom tablecloth or a different color tablecloth to help you stand out. Recently there was a posting on the IGDA SA Facebook group asking for advice on AvCon, and there was a really good bit of advice that was, again, given by Kathy. Sorry, you get a few shout outs tonight, Kathy. That I thought was really awesome, so I'm just going to quote it here, which is, "It's not about competing with other displays, because the visitors usually seem relaxed and able to play as many games as they are interested in. It's more about pleasing and delighting the people who play your game and giving them a good backdrop for their selfies." Right. That's the kind of mindset I think is really helpful to come into conventions with. Something that I really also encourage you to think a bit about are unique hooks that you can provide, not just in your game but at your booth, to make it sort of more memorable and to make your presence there kind of shareable as well. So you can do a whole bunch of things that are kind of distinct to your game. For example, if you have a very competitive game with leaderboards, you can have a competition that runs throughout the convention, and maybe above your booth you have a current leaderboard. That'll attract the most competitive players to your booth, which might be the players that you're looking to get the best feedback for your game. Alternatively, if you're trying to get a whole bunch of different people to play your game, maybe don't run a high scoreboard or disable it in your build, because otherwise you get people coming back and back, the same people coming back and back and back playing your game, and you won't be able to get new players on. You can do giveaways, so if you're signing people up to a mailing list, maybe you give a free copy of the game when it's released, or a t-shirt to one of the people who sign up to the mailing list. At a lot of places you can give away food. I would kind of encourage not to do that, but it's a thing. One thing I've seen done really well, which was at one event there was a developer who was selling their game, and once you bought the game they would choose a piece of fruit for you to eat, which was really nice. I've seen another developer make fortune cookies, and on the fortune cookies, they had inside they had a lovely message, and on the back of that message, they had a key to redeem their game. But yeah, of course, just be very careful. People have food allergies. There's different dietary preferences, and at a bunch of events, usually when there are children, the children might want the sugary lollies, but the parents might not be so keen. A really cool example I saw last year of a neat hook was this thing here done by Matt Kelly from Mokomoto. And what Matt did was he offered people a copy of his game as long as they traded for something that was had some kind of value. And then throughout the event, what Matt did was he put everything he traded onto the desk here. So he's got like a crunchy bar, he's got energy drinks, someone drew him a picture, he's got a toothbrush, there's just a case of the legendary edition of Halo, no game, just case. So.
And also the expand.
Yeah, I traded a key. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, one thing that's really useful with printing your key onto cards is that you can just trade it with other developers, which is really good because developers are really good at giving other developers feedback. Well, most of the time. A thing that we tried at I hope there's no. I don't know if there's volume here. I can disable the. Yeah, okay, no volume. Yeah, so a thing that we did at PAX Australia in 2014. So, usually we would, when exhibiting, would have a tablet that we would use to sign people up to a mailing list, but we forgot the tablet, and so we arrived at PAX and we were given this small kit of things, and in that kit there were post-it notes. And so one of the ideas that we had was, we thought that we would ask everyone who played the game just to write down one word to describe their experience with the game on the post-it note. And if they wanted to keep up to date with the game, they would write their email address on the back. Then what we did was we stuck these up at the back of our booth at PAX. And then, when people walked past, a lot of people would just, see this wall of post-it notes and kind of ask, what was this about? So it's another way of meaningfully engaging with the audience. That was there, and it was really cool. It sucked afterwards trying to read everyone's handwriting, but it was really great. And we also made this video, which we then shared with press as well, and that was included in some of their coverage at the event. I have lost my. There we go. In thinking about all this marketing material, you also want to come up with a really, obviously a clear pitch, but also a call to action. So if someone really loves your game at the event, what should they do, right? So you can have maybe a Discord community set up where they can join that and be part of, the community that you're forming around your event. Maybe there's a mailing list or social media. Maybe you can point them to buying the game or sharing the trailer. You need to think of something that you can move players onto if they really like your game, so that they can be kept in the loop with what's going on. Okay, press. Yeah, this is a good one. Sorry, I'm trying to talk really fast because there's so much to get through, so I hope this isn't boring or anything. All right, press. So usually at a lot of events, you'll have people who can sign up for a media pass. So they get free access to the event, on the provision that they're going to, cover it in some way. And, the event organizers will then maintain a press list of everyone who's applied for those press passes. And at some events, they will actually give you this list, which is, really useful for you to reach out. At some events, they won't do that. So at AvCon, they usually, they might this year, I don't know. But, they usually don't give you a press list. And if that's the case, what you can do is you can just go, do some searching online to find potential journalists who might rock up at the events. Sometimes a journalist will announce their presence at an event on Twitter. They might just say, "Oh, I'm looking for some cool games, at PAX Australia this year." But yeah, you can just search online, Google, YouTube, and find journalists who've previously covered the event, and then build up a press list of your own. Then from there, you want to filter that list so you find a group of press that are going to be interested in your game, and then you want to reach out to them as well. And I would recommend reaching out to press at least 3 weeks before the event, usually at least 3.5. Because closer to the event, they're going to be flooded with emails from a whole bunch of other developers who are really keen to get, to get some coverage. The other benefit is if you reach out 3 weeks earlier and you don't get a response, then a week before you can just send a polite follow-up email as well, because sometimes people just overlook stuff. When reaching out, you need to give press a good reason to check out your game. Maybe maybe it's an interesting game that's similar to other games I've covered before. Maybe you've been selected for an award. Maybe you have a special hook that you've got at your booth that the press might be interested in talking about. But yeah, you have to give them a reason to come and check it out. When doing your research for this, you also, if you can, without being too creepy, you want to kind of get a sense of what these people look like, so that if they walk past your booth, you know that who they are, and you're ready to approach them. And for a lot of the major outlets, the really journalists for the big sites, I would really encourage you to also think of possible introductions as well. I remember when we were showing Expand at the Tokyo Game Show, at that time, while we were at the booth, I saw a group of journalists from GameSpot. There was Mary Kish, who's now I think on Twitch. There was Pete Evans, and there was Ed from GameSpot Australia. And they were just wandering around this area, and nobody knew that they were journalists from GameSpot, right? And they were looking a little bit lost. So one of the things that we did was, we approached them, and we just said, hey, guys, how you doing? You seem a bit lost, but just to let you know, this space is the indie area. There's a whole bunch of games here to check out. These 8 games here are for Sense of Wonder Night. We're showing a game as part of that, which you're welcome to check out. But, I'd actually recommend checking out these other games. And we listed actually a few other games a bit cooler than ours. And they really appreciated that. And in the end, they actually covered our game as well, which is really nice. I should say, though, that with coming up to press, it can be very intimidating, and it can sometimes feel somewhat slimy or opportunistic. But just remember the following things. Firstly, journalists are going to these events because they're looking to cover games, they want good stories, and they want good angles. They're there doing a job. A lot of these places will do a roundup feature where they cover several games, right? On top of that, you've worked hard on a great game. If you put in all this effort into this game, there must be something interesting or worthwhile about it that's driven you to make it. And, in a lot of cases, that interesting thing that's, driving you is potentially something that journalists might be interested in knowing about. Of course, you can and you should approach this with sincerity, respectfulness, and a degree of directfulness as well. Get straight to the point. Journalists are going to appreciate that. And if at any stage in this process, if you make a mistake, if you do something wrong, just feel free to apologize. Most press out there understand that it's very intimidating, coming up to people you don't know and introducing yourself. They're very forgiving, right? Especially here in Australia. They're a great bunch, right? Yeah. Sorry, I shouldn't. Of course, you also want to know, have some things prepared. So for a whole bunch of common questions, you should have answers, and you should be able to answer those common questions without an if, a but, or an So these are the kind of questions such as, what is your game? What makes it interesting? Who's working on it? When is it going to be released, and for what platforms? You should be able to just fire off these answers, as if you were in your sleep. It should be, it should be ridiculously easy. So practice this over and over and over again until you're sick of it, and then practice it several times more. You want to know what specific points that you're going to raise with the journalists are, and hopefully, the points that you're going to raise are going to feed into a larger marketing plan that you have for your game. You want to know what you're prepared to say and what you're not prepared to say. Don't go out and announce a release date if you haven't talked to the rest of your team. And of course, you want to do a whole bunch of the sort of press basics. So you want to have, a press kit that's, easily available for journalists, online. You want to have your contact details that you can easily just give them. You want to have all those kind of basics sorted. One thing that you can do, and this is kind of useful for really busy events, is that you can set a machine aside for the press, right? This can be kind of nice because sometimes it's, it's not really nice booting people off, the game that they're currently playing. So you might have another machine that's at the back of your booth or sort of that's tucked away that you can just give to press so they don't have to wait in line. Depending on the convention, you could have lines up to an hour. Some of these events get very, very busy. It's also worth thinking about kind of press availability. So something that I've observed is that a lot of press like to do their work when it's not as busy and it's a bit more quiet. It makes it easier to ask questions and get good answers. So usually what the press will do is they'll spend maybe the first day of an event going around and just scouting out all the different games, trying to find out what looks good and then what's interesting. Then on the following day, they might come through and they just start playing some games and talking to developers. So don't let your guard down even when things seem quiet. The good thing is that a lot of press passes are easily identifiable. Maybe it's like a blue ribbon or something. It's you can kind of spot this stuff as well. It's worth remembering that at some of the larger events, a lot of press are going to go and they're going to cover the big games first. So if you don't see any press for a while, it's probably because they're covering the big announcements from the big console manufacturers, and then will come back later and look at the smaller independent titles. Some conventions have a press hour. That is the first hour of the first day they let press in before everybody else. If that's the case, you want to be bright, up and early and ready for those. A thing that you can do is you can create a timetable, and when you reach out to journalists, you can get them to book a time to come and see you where you'll definitely be at the booth. We did this at PAX in 2014, and we got a pretty good result. I think partly because we were able to flatter a whole bunch of smaller websites, who've never really had the experience of being asked to book in the time. Sorry. But for some journalists, especially those working for the bigger sites, they won't be able to commit to the timetable. But it's a useful mechanism to get people to add something to their calendar so they're reminded to check out your game again. And one thing some people do, I don't really like this, but there is a media lounge, that is reserved for journalists at some of the bigger events. You can politely ask people to get into that lounge and put your brochures and cards on the table. Alternatively, if you want to actually have a long-form interview with a journalist, that's not, you can ask them to go to this media room where it's quiet and you can have that in-depth conversation. Because sometimes it's really hard to do a good interview on the show floor. After the event has finished, it's worth sending some follow-up emails. So for everyone that you met, you want to send them a follow-up email. And in those emails, if you're prepared to, you want to provide a build. Don't send press a build of your game before the convention, because then you're giving them a reason to not go to your booth. Right? Okay, networking. Okay. Sorry, my mouth is really dry. So a lot of these events offer really good opportunities to network with people. And I think at the very least, you want to go to the effort to introduce yourself to the people in the booths neighboring you, right? You've got to be spending a lot of time with the people in the neighboring booths throughout the convention. And to avoid that, awkwardness, just introduce yourself very early on, right? I'm sure by the end of the convention, you'll probably be fed up of them, but in the meantime, just introduce yourself. It just removes all the awkwardness out of the situation. On top of that, just by talking to them, maybe they can let you know things that you might have previously overlooked. So there might be some real hot party that night that you haven't been invited to, and they might be able to help you get the invite to that event, right? I'd also recommend making the effort to introduce yourself to as many other developers in the space as you reasonably can. For smaller events like AvCon, it's possible to introduce yourself to everybody. For large conventions, you might find it more useful to scout out particular developers who maybe they're making a game similar to yours, or maybe they're experiencing the same kind of difficulties during development that you are. I tend to find that early mornings before the event has started are actually really good opportunities to network with people. It's nice and quiet. Everyone's kind of set up and ready to go. Gives you a chance to play people's game, and put a face to that game as well. Because a lot of the time, we see these games on the stores, and you kind of forget that real people made them. And yeah, and in early morning is nice and quiet, so you can get in some good conversation. If you're wanting to meet with platform holders or service providers kind of in advance, at the event, you can email them in advance to kind of book a time. That's kind of useful. Alternatively, these people do weave in and out of the show floor. They can be very deceptive. They might introduce themselves to you if you're lucky. Conventions usually have events usually have other events around them, so kind of out-of-hours events. If you're going to any of these, I would really encourage that you take the time to freshen up, maybe change up the clothes, have a shower, just relax. You want to be in a good state of mind when going to these. You don't want to bring that exhaustion that you have from the show floor to the other events as well. Alternatively, if you're feeling really tired, sometimes it's better to not go. It's better to have that time to, for a bit of self-care, and just to sit and, have a quiet dinner and enjoy some peace and quiet. This is something you really want to think about if, there are people in the room who are thinking about traveling out to Melbourne International Games Week. You have GCAP, you have Unite, and you have PAX. If you go out every single night, you're going to feel terrible. It'll impact, your ability to actually perform really well on the day. So yeah, don't overdo it and treat yourself kindly. For AvCon, there are a few different events that you might want to check out. On Friday, there's most likely going to be an ARG event in the city, which is a really great opportunity to meet people who've traveled out, from interstate. On Saturday night, there's nothing. There are formally arranged. There might be a few other things going on, but I suppose in general, if there's nothing going on a particular night, you can also use that as a great opportunity to catch up with people you've just met at the convention. Maybe a group of you just go out for dinner and have some casual drinks. On Sunday, after the Indie Games Room is all settled up, there's usually an after party. There's the AvCon after party, and there's the Indie Games Room after party. You definitely want to go to the Indie Game. Well, if you're showing in the Indie Games Room, you can't go to the AvCon one. Don't worry, it's not that great. Oh shit, it's recorded. I tend to find the Indie Games Room after party is really great, really friendly, just really chill. So if you can, try and make it up to that. Yeah. What's next? Sales. Okay, so I don't really have too much experience with sales. So this might be a thing people want to raise their hand and throw stuff at me at the end. But yeah, sales are a really great way of offsetting the cost for exhibiting at an event, right? It's a little bit harder, so beyond just selling your game, you can also sell merchandise. It's a little bit tricky for us based in Australia because it's a bit hard to carry all that merchandise overseas. But if you do have, you can sell copies of your game, and you can just sell business cards with keys printed out as well. At AvCon, I think there's a flat fee for selling your game. You want to do a bit of math to see if it's actually worth it for you. If you're selling a mobile game, then I wouldn't actually bother with that, because a lot of the time you can just, people will just look it up on the store in front of you and buy it then and there. If you're intending on handling cash, then of course you want to make sure that you have secure storage and enough change. If you're doing card sales, then you'll need some kind of point of sale system. I'm not familiar with any, unfortunately, but I do know that they do exist, and you can get hardware as well. So you can buy card scanners and sort of the PayPass readers as well. That all you need is like a mobile phone. You just plug them in, and away you go. For games, for selling games at an event, you want to make sure that you put a discount on your game, and quite a good, generous discount. That way you can really leverage impulse purchases. I mean, if your game is currently available and it's the same price at the event as it is on the store, then people might just decide to buy it later and then never buy it. As I've kind of mentioned before, the easiest way to kind of sell games is to just have the code printed out on a business card. Alternatively, if you do have a digital system, you can email people codes, which is a great way for handling any situations where they might lose the card. Of course, it's also worth thinking about any kind of fallback if any digital solution that you have fails. Sometimes you'll have a great internet connection during the setup of an event, but then when you're surrounded full of thousands of bodies, your internet connection might just die. So you want to think about having that fallback. All right, so I've got a few other little bits and pieces that didn't really fit into the sort of the goal level discussion. Firstly, food and water. So you want to make sure, maybe that's my call to have a sip of water. You want to make sure that you're drinking water at these events. Don't have soft drinks or energy drinks. Like, they're bad for you. You'll feel terrible, and honestly, you'll probably look terrible as well, because the things that we put in our body do have a big impact on us. If you have coffee or any of these things, you might want to also bring some breath mints so that you don't have that terrible coffee breath. Instead of don't buy bottled water. I mean, come on, people, there's so much plastic in our oceans today. It's just terrible. Get yourself one of these. Usually a lot of events have water fountains, and during the setup, what I would recommend you do is just to go and scout out where those water fountains are. I mean, at AvCon, there's one that's not too far away from the Indie Games room. I use it every year. I'm usually pretty hydrated. But have some water. You also should consider bringing along small amounts of food that you can eat as well, just to keep your energy levels up, and just to keep you, feeling good throughout the day. I'd recommend avoiding any sort of greasy, sticky food, so no chips, no salted nuts. Just try to avoid junk food. What I would recommend are things like bananas, where you get the slow burn energy. Bananas are amazing, God's gift to the planet. Or things like trail mix, or maybe just muesli bars as well. You also want to bring along some painkillers, because you can get a headache, and you don't want to be on the show floor with a headache, so make sure you stock up on those. Hygiene. Yeah, deodorant, wear it. And reapply as necessary. Of course, don't use aerosols, they're bad for the environment. That's just dumb. One of the things that you'll probably won't realize is that by the time you're finished exhibiting at an event, you can really smell, and you might not notice it because you've been surrounded by other smelly people all day. So just assume by the end of the day, you got to smell, and that you might not notice. Of course, bring a fresh T-shirt at the least for every day of the event. You want to be nice and fresh. You can bring hand sanitizer at your booth. So the stuff that you squirt out and it instantly dries as you rub into your hands. That's really good to avoid any colds or infections that are going around. A lot of people feel inclined to put that at the back of the booth, but I think it's actually good practice to put that in the front of your booth by the controllers, because just regular attendees would really appreciate that. Of course, they might use a bit much, but what are you gonna do? You should also bring some hand sanitizers and some wipes just to wipe down your controllers and your headphones as well. They get really mucky and dirty throughout the day, and you don't want someone's first experience of the game being grabbing this grimy, sweaty controller. And if you're feeling really sick but you must attend, or maybe you're recovering from a cold, then think about bringing a face mask as well, just so you don't infect other people. Sleep. Yeah, so you want to make sure that you get a good night's sleep, not just in the lead up to the event, but also during the convention, and not just then every night. There's a really bad thing in our industry where people are overworked and aren't getting enough sleep. We need to change this. Don't be stupid, get some sleep, take care of yourself. On top of that, you also just want to be generally prepared so that you avoid stress on the day. And if you are stressed, this is definitely going to impact your presentation. I remember when I was exhibiting at PAX, there was this one interview I did that was recorded, and that morning I decided to get up really early to send those last few press emails, just to get that last chance to get some more press over to our booth, and also because our new trailer had just finished the night before. But so I was pretty tired for the first day of the event, and I remember doing an interview, and I watched that interview back later, and you can see that I've got this nervous twitch because I'm so stressed out, right? And that's going to affect presentation, right? So, make sure you're well rested and you're taking care of yourself. Also take regular breaks. If you have a team of people, which I recommend you have a team of people to help you out, it's useful to form a timetable. This is especially useful if there are people who are exhibiting with you that want to check out other things at the convention. So you want to have that planned out well in advance. When you have people that are leaving or going on break, make sure that you communicate that with the rest of your team. You want to make sure that everyone's kept in the loop. Don't rely on just posting something online. People forget to check their phone. Maybe they lose coverage in the convention center. You want face-to-face contact about this. When you have a lunch break, I would really recommend leaving the actual venue itself, going outside, getting some fresh air. It just keeps you grounded. It makes you feel better. And it means you're more likely to actually take a decent break as opposed to just 2 minutes outside, then you're back into it. Again, that's going to impact your performance. A thing that I really like to do at AvCon is whenever I'm taking a lunch break, I go all the way to Zambrera's on Hindley Street. I get myself an awesome vegan burrito. I sit there and I eat it slowly. And then I walk all the way back, slowly, of course. And then by the time I've gotten back, I'm feeling refreshed. I'm feeling ready to go. And I'm killing it. Actually, I'm not killing anything. Killing's bad. What else do we have here? You want to think about getting the appropriate number of people at your booth. So you need enough people to onboard new players onto your game, as well as having someone available to talk to press if they pop up. The busiest times at conventions are usually between 11 and 2 o'clock. So ideally you'd have all hands on deck. If it's quiet, then people can go on a break. Sometimes you can have too many people at a booth, in which case it's good for people to sort of cycle around. Of course, you also want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on your equipment as well. Unfortunately, there are some cases where equipment can be stolen, but if you've got enough people at your booth, that tends to be avoided. You want to be particularly cautious around sort of the end of the day and the early morning when things are quiet. That's when people are usually most careless. Beyond that, I'll just kind of finish up by saying that, just encouraging you or just telling you to be respectful and polite to everyone that you meet. Don't make assumptions about any prior knowledge that people would have when they're coming to check out your game, or just assuming that people aren't interested. My partner is like really into heavy metal music, but apparently she doesn't look like someone who's into heavy metal music. So every time she's going to check out records or whatever, someone will say to her, "Oh, you don't look like someone who's into heavy metal music," and that's just rude. It's impolite, and it's just so dumb. So don't do that. Be careful about cutting into your neighbor's booth. So sometimes you want to make sure that you want to make sure that there's space between the booths. On top of that, if you're playing music, try to keep it not too loud, and constantly be talking to your neighbors to see if it's annoying them, right? Because that can happen and it's really frustrating. And if you're not sure, just ask. It's just a common courtesy. People appreciate that. A lot of these events are powered by amazing volunteers. AvCon itself is entirely run by volunteers. All the enforcers at PAX are volunteers as well. And a lot of these people are putting in much more time than I think a lot of people appreciate. So please go out of your way, thank them. These events wouldn't exist without them. I was also a volunteer, so we really appreciate hearing that feedback. In particular, I suppose talking about AvCon, here in Adelaide we have a really good reputation as being a really friendly and welcoming place. And that's something that I would really encourage you all to maintain. So if you're showing your game at AvCon, or if you're just attending and checking out the other games, please be really friendly to our friends who are coming in from interstate. Keep up that reputation for us being a great and welcoming and warming place. And that's it from me. Hopefully I didn't go too long. I have a website, I have a Twitter, and I have some things to plug after questions. So give me 2 plugs. And that's it. Any questions? Oh, nailed it. No questions. Thank you.
I've got a bit of an answer to a question you had, Chris. Square readers. If anyone's wanting to get hold of an electronic payment device, you've got $50 from Officeworks, plug into your phone, they do pay wave. So I highly recommend that.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries.
Was there a question here? Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have the luxury of choosing where your booth is within an event, where is the best place to be? Is it at the front or further back?
I've never had the liberty of actually choosing. Well, actually, I have had the liberty, but
Theoretically, if you did.
it depends what you want, right? So, so this year, right, I'm showing a game at AvCon, and I'm not after press attention. I want some basic feedback. So I'm hoping to get, and I've told the organizers, I'm hoping to get a booth that's further back because I don't really need the attention,
Yep.
right? And so, and there's probably only going to be just me and maybe one other volunteer, so we don't have many people. So in that case, being at the back is better. Generally speaking, yeah, being at the front is good. But it also depends on what's around you as well. So you might be at like the front, but maybe at the other end there's like the Nintendo booth or something, and there's a lot of people moving back and forth between that booth. In that case, you want to be on that front, not on the other front. Yeah, but generally speaking, the front is better. I don't know. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter. I think a lot of superstition grows up around cons. I've noticed after a convention, people will be saying, people were feeding through from here to here, or it was a Sunday, and it was better, and so on. The only things that really matter is how good your product are and how switched you are on that day. So I wouldn't worry about it. Like Chris said, you'll never get the choice either.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can pay as part of the Indie Games Room, and that's something worth considering. It kind of depends. I mean, you also attract, kind of what I was suggesting before, you do attract different kinds of people if you're at the front or at the back. Like, if you're at the front, you have a lot of people who just walk past. If you're at the back, you've got to have people who are actually interested in the space, and they're going to check stuff out. So, yeah. I don't know. Are there many events that actually allow you to pick spaces? Do you know one? Or you just-
No, I was just speaking theoretically.
Yeah. Anyone else? This side of the room? I feel like I'm lecturing again. Sam.
Two questions, both related to the same thing. If you have friends volunteering to help you, how do you make sure that you're not taking advantage of their kindness and making sure that they're not doing too much or that kind of thing, that you're taking care of them? And what kind of information would you want to make sure that they have about your game so that they can talk to people and not go,
Yeah, I think in terms, so that's a really good point. So if you do have, kind of a question, if you do have volunteers who aren't part of the development team of your game, then you really have to think about what people are, that you really have to understand that people are contributing work to you, right? This is unpaid labor, right? A thing that the video game industry loves to exploit, but we won't go there. Steam. But yeah, so I think it's a twofold thing. So I think firstly, you have to have that sort of honest communication channel. So like talk to them and just like let them know that you understand that like this is unpaid work and if they need any reimbursement, right? Like maybe they're willing to volunteer their time, but it might be like really nice if you just say pay for like train tickets or transport to the event or their food for the weekend. I mean, a lot of people are pretty understanding that many developers don't have much money. So I think if you just have that open and honest communication and sort of contribute and give back where you can. So food, travel, like those kind of things. In terms of like what people should know, you can actually get away with not knowing very much. But so you want to know what the game is, be able to give a bit of a description of the game, know what to do if anything goes wrong. So if there are like passwords on the computer that you've got, you want them to be shared, so everyone in the team knows how to, get the game back up if there's a problem. You want people to know, how to play and how to onboard people effectively, and just to be able to talk about it a bit. Like what I find is like if there are volunteers helping you out, it's usually good to be with them for the first sort of most of the first day or so, just so that like they can kind of warm up and see how it's done. Because a lot of like exhibiting is about this really tight loop where someone comes to you, you introduce the game, you talk to them, you know, they're either waiting in line, you're talking to them, or they're playing the game and you're getting feedback. So I think, you know, once you've done that a few times, it sets in really quickly. If you have certain like playtesting kind of design questions that you kind of want answered, you know, you can just sort of mention them to the volunteers as well. You know, be on the lookout, you know, see if people get stuck here. I really want to know this. Beyond that, yeah, I think that's about it. I don't know. I'm probably missing something. Am I missing something?
Actually, I've got another question. More to do with the actual, like, the game that you're actually presenting itself. What do you think about, like, ideal amount of time that you're presenting? As in, like, how much of a chunk of the game? Like a small demo, a full game?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's no perfect answer, but I'll give you some things to think about. So I'm not going to answer your question. It's a polite way of saying answering that. So there's like a basic kind of math equation you can do. Like if I have a shorter game that's like 5 minutes long, then maybe, you know, I can get like cycle through more people. And if I have a longer game, then I'm not going to be able to cycle through as many people. Generally, what I've done is I've just had the whole game there, and some people have played everything that we've had, which has been, you know, which has meant they've been playing for, you know, 30 minutes, an hour, right? At some events that can be, you know, bad because you're missing out on you know, finding new people. But with that said, a lot of people, you know, it's useful information in a way because it means that like if someone's at a busy, you know, at a busy event, if it's noisy around them and they're willing to spend an hour on your game, that's a really good indicator that you're onto something good, right? Yeah. On top of that, it's also if you're doing a separate split build, like where you maybe only show 5 minutes, you know what you might present might not be 5 minutes of like the first 5 minutes of your game. It might be a compressed 5 minutes. The problem with that is you're then getting feedback on something that's different from your game, slightly different. So it's like you know, there's a little caveat there. I find it useful just to show the whole game, but it kind of depends. It's you know, very case by case basis. But yeah.
Yeah, so to piggyback on Sam's question a bit, is it worth, do you know if anyone's ever got like salespeople to sell the game for at a convention? Because you know, on the one hand, game developers are often a little bit introverted and not the best salespeople. On the other hand, no one's going to sell your game like you.
Yeah.
I think that people get a bit of a buzz meeting the developers sometimes. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, there are some groups who do bring like kind of, I wouldn't say like salespeople, but people with more of a marketing background.
Yeah.
Like you see, you know, publishers will often have some of their sales team there. Those same people are also working on the game, so they kind of have that similar aura to what the developer has, and that can usually be effective because they're, you know, much better at, you know, prosecuting that sale. What I've tend to find is that like there are some people who, I mean, I suppose there's two things, which is like firstly, most indie developers aren't superstars that people want to race out and meet, right? Like, you know, the reality is most people don't care that much about us. Sorry to say, and so, but there's also like this nice, warm, fuzzy kind of experience, you know, thing that you have with having the developer there. So I don't know, like usually what happens when I've been exhibiting is my partner usually comes along and helps out. And she has a background in PR, journalism, and marketing.
Right.
And she just killed, like she's, hope you're watching the stream. So she's really good.
Yeah.
Like, you know, to the point where like other developers are trying to poach her and it's terrible.
Right, okay. So it's sort of worth finding friends and people who you can exploit like that.
Yeah, usually.
Quite free lunch for, sorry.
Well, I mean, again, of course, you know, like
Yeah.
if you're exploiting them, obviously you want to repay them in some
Sure,
way,
yeah.
and actually, you know, have that open discussion. Anyway, yeah. So like, well, I suppose one of the things to think about is that like sometimes it is useful to bring people in as volunteers who aren't necessarily games people, but really good communicators.
That's what I was thinking, because it is a hard skill set, really, isn't it? Being able to sell something like that. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
It's something you often learn if you do conventions.
I mean, there's also this sort of other side to it of if you're thinking about being in this industry for a long term, then it's a really useful skill to have. And so maybe you suck right now, but it's worth sticking it out and continually like going through it.
And this is where you're saying do AFCON first.
Yeah, that's right. Anyone have any, maybe not questions, but just points they want to raise?
Just a quick one to save people some headache. If you get one of those like nice big banners printed, don't put a date on it, because then you can't use it again the next time you show your game. Like your game's probably just gonna look the same and have the same name, so you can just reuse it. So don't put anything that'll expire.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I remember we went to this this Mixer event, and they printed out signs for us, and at the top of the signs they had like the event name, and we just cut that off afterwards and reused it everywhere else. I mean, yeah. All right. Have I answered all your questions, Adam? I asked people on Twitter for some questions, and I don't know if I've answered them all. All right, I'm going to give 2 plugs then. What do we do first? All right, I'm not affiliated with this, but I think this is a really cool thing that more people should know about. There's a group of people in Australia who are really keen to work towards unionizing the games industry. So, unions are organizations that work for workers. They represent you, they fight for better conditions, for better pay. I think this is an industry that needs better pay and better conditions, and I'm sure you do too. If not, there's a lot of other things that unions help out with. Countries with strong union representations have lower levels of inequality as well. So this group, Game Workers Australia, is looking to help unionize the game industry. They're currently doing an industry survey that you can take part in. They have a mailing list that you can sign up for. And they also have a Discord channel with a lot of friendly people that you can join as well. Their website is gameworkers.com.au. I'd highly recommend checking them out, joining them, and spreading it to all your other friends who are in the industry. And then the second, so do that. It's a really good group. And the second thing I want to plug is, some of you might have seen this already, but a few local developers powered up all their games together to form a bundle, and we're currently selling that bundle on itch.io, and all the money that we raise from the bundle is going to the Hart Street Centre, who help with those people experiencing homelessness. So the bundle's got like 10 awesome titles. There's both digital, analog games, there's a cool zine, some awesome stuff. Some of the developers are here tonight. You might be able to meet them. It's currently $20 US. All the money's going to the Hart Street Centre. Please help us out and check out some cool games. And also check out the other cool games in the itch.io summer sale. Itch is awesome. And that's all from me.